Thank you guys for joining me here for our last segment of today's show. And just to touch on the running back for the Green Bay Packers, Josh Jacobs, was down there in New Orleans like a lot of people are, honestly, for the Super Bowl, obviously. And really yesterday there was a lot going on for Media Week, especially down there in Radio Row, where there was a lot of guys that I saw talking. Like Trey Hendrickson had a lot of interesting stuff to say. We'll probably cover that tomorrow. Myles Garrett doubled down on his position to want to trade out of Cleveland. Fred Warner was on there as well, talking on the Pat McAfee show. I saw Malik Neighbors also giving some interesting quotes as well. So there was a lot going on down there on Radio Row. And one of the guys also that was down there was Josh Jacobs, and he had a bunch of interviews to do where he had the same message in all of them, right? For the most part, he said that the Green Bay Packers, he felt, needed to add a proven, in his words, number one wide receiver to help this offense, and Jordan Love especially. And he said, or part of what he said in some of these interviews was, we've got a really young group of receivers. All can be really, really, really special. But I think personally, we need a guy that's proven to be a number one already. So somebody we know is going to be a little bit more consistent. Is the word that I found so interesting in this context with the Packers and this team and how they built it. But, with that, he was asked about maybe Davante Adams, being a potential option for him and what he thought about that. And he said that if he could come at the right price, he's had already some conversations with Davante Adams, and he would definitely have a spot, or he feels like this team would have a spot on the roster for a guy like Davante Adams to make another return over here to Green Bay and make his way back to where he saw most of his success, obviously, right, in his career, which would be an awesome thing to happen, I think. But, there are some things to get over. But in terms of the number one receiver point and Josh Jacobs wanting to add that and having that be a position of not weakness, but, a position of emphasis where you want to get better at, according to Josh Jacobs, right? You look at this team this past season where they had the 12th ranked passing offense this season with Jayden Reed, Tucker Kraft, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and Dontavion Wicks, right? All those guys, they were ranked 12th, with Jayden Reed getting 157 yards, Tucker Kraft at 707 yards receiving, Christian Watson with over 600, Romeo Doubs at around 600 as well, and Wicks contributing 416 receiving yards. And all these guys are under 25 years old, so they're growing together. They're still not even close really to their prime, so they're getting to that point. And this year was just a down year, I would say, for them. There wasn't that much explosiveness, or I would say that much excitement around this team as it was in their first year, with Jordan Love at the helm. So Green Bay, to that point, also hasn't had a 1,000-yard receiver since Davante Adams. Since Davante Adams had over 1,500 in 2021, then he left that year and joined Josh Jacobs, funny enough, in Las Vegas. So it's been a while since, the typical number one receiver has been there for the Green Bay Packers. And I agree that more than not, I agree more with what Josh Jacobs is saying more than I don't. But why I highlighted consistent and why I mentioned that was such a fascinating thing for me is because when Josh Jacobs said someone who's consistent, because, this idea of Green Bay having so many options, right, produces a little bit of inconsistency, right? When you have like 4 or 5 guys that you say can contribute to this offense, and that you think, there is some sort of advantage there when the opposing defense doesn't know what's coming, or they don't know who you're going to throw the ball to, right? You don't have a number one guy like that. That does create some sort of benefit and maybe an advantage there, but we didn't really see that too much this year, and it does produce a little bit of that inconsistency that Josh Jacobs wants to get rid of, I guess, in a way, right? He wants to see it be more stable, and it's just very interesting, right? Because we thought that it would be a great thing. It would be a great advantage for the Packers to not have a number one receiver and kind of have everybody do their own thing. But it appears like you do need an element of a top guy that can separate himself from the rest of the group. Not to say that, the rest are bums or anything like that, but it feels like for the majority of teams, and what Josh Jacobs is alluding to, you need one of these top guys there that is a certified, reception, can get open on anybody, and is someone that you trust very much so to have a go-to play or have a must complete reception on anything, right? You need to have one guy that all right, if I go to him, I know what I'm getting, because also, with the multitude of receivers, right, you don't really you have a play drawn up for a guy, but you don't know necessarily, like a number one receiver would, if that guy's going to be open or if that guy's going to do the right thing on the route. And if everything's going to go well, you don't know if it's going to go directly to him. You don't have as much security as you would, again, if Davante Adams was there, right? So I think that's what Josh Jacobs was pointing to, and I think that's why it's so interesting, because the Packers, were very much in favor of having a lot of options, right? And now Josh Jacobs comes in and says, like, we might need a number one guy. And although that might be what he wants, and it kind of reminds me of the Bills a little bit, right? This past game that they had in the AFC Championship, where you have a lot of good, talented players like Amari Cooper, Dalton Kincaid, Shakir, Curtis Samuel, but you don't really have a number one guy, and it feels like that's one of the things that was missing, right? Knowing that you can go to this guy when all else fails, you need something guaranteed, you have your guy. It reminded me of the Bills a little bit, but when you're bringing in Davante Adams to this, it gets a little bit tricky, because although it'd be a great reunion, he's under contract with the Jets for 2 more seasons, right, over there in New York. But the caveat, or the one thing kind of stopping that, is because he does have a $38 million cap hit in 2025. So if that's something that the Jets aren't really rocking with, he is a candidate to be traded or potentially be released. If the Jets really don't want to have that on their books anymore, that could be an avenue where it opens up the possibility of returning to the Packers. But because he is under contract, right, it's not like he could just get up and sign with the Packers, right? It doesn't work like that, obviously. But I mean, you do have other options if you're talking about number ones on the free agent market, like T. Higgins or Stephon Diggs, potentially, but those two come with their own sort of problems, with T. Higgins probably costing you a good amount, and I don't know what the Packers cap situation is, but he's probably going to cost you like close to $30 million per year. So is that something you want to take up? I don't know. Maybe, but that seems to be a big, discussion point there. Or Stephon Diggs, I think he's still got a lot left, but you are weary of that ACL injury. So I don't know. Is that somebody you want to make your unquestionable number one guy if you do have some questions about his health? That also comes with it. So overall, I mean, I understand what Josh Jacobs is trying to do, and you understand when maybe they don't have a number one guy, but you see in your own division, guys like Justin Jefferson, DJ Moore, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who I would say are their clear number one guys, and 2 out of the 3 of those teams, had 2 of the best records in the entire NFL this season. So not only do you maybe feel that way, but you're seeing it play out in front of you. Like maybe if we had like a number one guy like that, we could get over the hump of beating these good teams, right? Because that was the thing with the Packers this year, right? They had a decent record, but all their losses came against all these playoff teams, right? So you got a good record, but when it comes to beating the very good teams, right, the next level teams, you fall short. And maybe having a number one receiver could have been the difference. We don't know, but that feels like the path that Josh Jacobs is kind of going down. So, I mean, if you add a guy like that, like Davante, say, does that mean the Packers are are right up there with the Vikings and the Lions. They did play them close, but um, I don't know if it necessarily means that they're on the same level, because I hold Minnesota and Detroit to a very high standard, and I might be the only one on Minnesota, but I feel like they got a lot going for them. And I don't know what's going to happen with Sam Darnold or JJ McCarthy, but I feel like they have a very good team, and they're only going to get better, right, going forward. So it doesn't look like Brian Flores is leaving either, so you're not really losing too much there. So I feel like maybe it makes them closer to Minnesota, but with Detroit, I mean, it could make them close with Detroit, but like Detroit could add like Myles Garrett or something, right? If they add Myles Garrett, like forget about it. They're gonna win the Super Bowl next year. But that's kind of where I stand on it. I like the idea. I understand what Josh Jacobs is getting at, and I too would probably feel like I need like a number one. I just need someone that I know is just like a certified baller, can go out there, get a catch for me, get a first down, never really covered, right? Honestly, something like that. I know you just can't pick them out of anywhere, right? But more often than not, I do agree with Josh Jacobs. I think he's making a good point here, and hopefully, the Packers can work something out there. And I would say ideally they would go after Davante Adams. That's just me, but we'll see. We'll see. That's a very interesting point to bring up now during the Super Bowl, right? We'll see how they react and whether they act on it as well. But for right now, that is everything I wanted to talk about on today's show. I wanted to thank you guys for joining me on today's episode of the Chip Shot Football Podcast. And as a reminder, please make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the Chip Shot Football Podcast, as well as following the network on all forms of social media and checking out the YouTube channel, especially the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel, where you can see more content around the NFL with me as your host, Manny Maradiaga, each and every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, covering and talking about the NFL each and every weekday. So, again, thank you guys for joining me today, and join me again tomorrow, same time, like I said, to discuss more about the Super Bowl that's pretty much just a couple days away. We're going to preview it and give you guys some more insight into the big game coming up this weekend.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to